Excellence is continuous. It can be complex or simple. Each day is an open challenge to achieve success and turn adversity into opportunity. At RGF Executive Search Japan, we make winning a daily objective by aligning unique bilingual talents who invigorate organizations and drive sustainable growth. Excellence begins and ends with people. To execute your Japan recruitment relationship, contact us and let's begin.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving up 1 hour of your time this afternoon. Delighted to represent RGF Executive Search, Healthcare and Life Sciences team this afternoon to talk to you a little bit about a subject that's passionate to my heart, which is leadership. Now, in my career, I've worked with many leaders as a leadership trainer, an executive coach, and now I select good leaders for my clients as an executive search consultant. In my experience, leaders who have clear values, who are able to articulate their principles, and companies, I was a management consultant too, companies that have clearly defined principles are easily able to navigate through difficult times and are the best leaders I've ever come across. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to bring to you a wonderful conversation with Kasper Bødker Mejlvang, I probably butchered the name, who is the President and Representative Director for Novo Nordisk Japan. Now, as you may know, you follow in the press, Novo Nordisk is going through an amazing growth period, but there are some very interesting origins to Novo Nordisk, a wonderful origin story. And today, Kasper is going to tell us a lot more about it. So let me introduce Kasper.
Russell.
Kasper, thank you so much for joining us. I think a great place to start is obviously starting at the beginning and telling us your story. And the story starts with, your ordinary world, your personal values, how you've acted on those values throughout your career. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and your values and your career so far.
Yeah, thank you, Russell. And first of all, thank you for having me for this talk. I look forward to it. You did a very good job on my name, even if I know it's very difficult to pronounce. It's a Danish name. I'm from Denmark, and I have been living in different countries, but I've been for most of my career with Novo Nordisk. I've spent 22 years in Novo Nordisk. I came into the company based on an upbringing which has been centered very much around a value of decency, always striving to try to be respectful to other people, be fair and be open and honest. And when I joined Novo Nordisk in 2002, I found myself in a company which is also built along the same values. And I guess that's also why I have been hanging around for the past 22 years, along with the purpose of the company, which I'm identifying very much with. Then, as you can see on the visual here, I've been moving quite a lot around in our company. I started in HR. I'm a psychologist by training. I also have a master's in management and an MBA, but I started in HR as a business partner, and then I moved from there into manufacturing, into leadership in the line of business in manufacturing, over to research and development. At some point, I also moved to France to head up a manufacturing site there. Then moved into commercial, heading up our home market in Denmark and Iceland. And then in 2022, I moved to Japan. And I think during the journey, I have become clear on some of the values that I'm striving for as a leader, which I think, again, is aligned to Novo Nordisk values. It's very much value around trust. So trying to build teams based on psychological safety, where we have a high level of trust. And I think that value has materialized after some initial experiences in manufacturing. I had actually of examples of where teams really worked well. Really winning team type spirits where everybody had each other's back and you could trust that decisions you took were some decisions that everybody would go out and execute on, even if they met resistance in their organizations. And after having experienced that, I experienced in other parts of the organization where that level of trust was not existing, and that really drove me to always try to build that in teams. So I'm very much a teams focused person. Probably also because I come from different backgrounds where I'm not the functional expert moving into a new area. Another key value for me has been being ambitious on behalf of the organization, on behalf of people in the organization, and not so much in order to push for stronger results, but actually because I experienced in a period of time where I was leading our lean manufacturing program across production, how being very ambitious can release a lot of creativity. If you have the right way of evaluating performance in the organization, where you don't force people to under-promise and over-deliver through conservative targets, but you actually appraise people for how they are creating learning through setting really ambitious targets, where in the beginning, when you set them, you will say, that's not possible. I mean, that would require that we had a completely different type of healthcare system, that we had a completely different type of IT infrastructure or whatever. And that actually feeds then into the strategy of what we need to build over the coming period to actually realize that target. And then the final value is around optimism or curiosity. I've always been a curious person, and I had a setback in my career. I've taken steps down several times, and at one time I had a major setback when I was in France, and that was very healthy for me in my leadership development. I had a lot of reflections about whether I wanted to stay with Novo Nordisk, and I decided to stay, but in a way where I actually freed myself to be the type of leader I believe was the right interpretation of our Novo Nordisk values, with a lot of optimism, not leading through frustration, and a lot of curiosity, and that drove a lot of positive both feedback but also results. So that has also stayed with me.
Yes, some very powerful values that have guided your career. Some great stories there. I'm very keen to delve a little bit further into certainly tapping into your background as a trained psychologist, which is very interesting. It's a very interesting origin story. You mentioned psychological safety, and I think that is something that also facilitates an environment of being able to take risk and exercise that curiosity that you mentioned. What would you advise leaders who are watching here today? There's a lot of leaders watching here today. What would you advise them to do to create psychological safety?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of different elements at play, but a very key element is that people can trust that if you have anything on their performance, if there's anything that you are in doubt of with them, you always go to the source. So you always go directly to the person, him or herself, and have a conversation and demonstrate how you really want that person to succeed, and that everything that you're doing around the person is for the person to succeed, even when you are tough on performance follow-ups, etc. And then training, the leadership team that you're sitting with to really, create a room of confidentiality where they can put difficult topics on the table, and that we challenge each other to respect that we are not taking those problems out of the room until we have agreed how do we handle them. And then maybe a final one is that you are not. It also comes down to how do you react to people when they are in difficult spots or they are presenting problems to you. And I was very inspired at some point in time. As I mentioned, I was leading our lean program. I was actually coming to Japan to learn from Toyota. And I met this lean sensei in a plant close to Nagoya, who was challenging us, the visitors, on, what is really your leadership response when you stand at this performance board meeting in the morning, which you typically have in production environments, and they show a red KPI because they didn't meet the production target yesterday, or because they're presenting a problem that might cause even bigger problems in maintenance or whatever. And so he asked that question, and we had, a lot of different kind of bits on it. But none of them was what he was looking for, because what he was looking for was really for the leader to say thank you. Thank you as the first thing. Thank you for bringing a problem to the table very fast. This is what we need if we want to learn. Thank you for bringing it before it grows big, because big problems cost a lot and they're difficult to solve. It's very easy to solve small problems, and all big problems have been small earlier on. So the game is just to create an environment where people can trust that when they bring something forward, they're being rewarded for it, and what they're being challenged on is then what type of learning are they taking out of the situation, and how good are we at then avoiding and preventing by going to the root cause that problems reoccur. And I think when you start to respond to people when you have difficult news coming across, it also builds psychological safety to really speak up and have a collaborative approach to driving the business.
That's a great story. So basically in Toyota, as you were saying, that sometimes, I guess, in some organizations, certainly ones that I've come across, there's a shoot the messenger tendency, and nobody wants to be that person, right, that shares the bad news. But in that example in Toyota, and as in your own leadership approach, saying thank you for highlighting a performance gap is it creates that psychological safety, as you mentioned.
And you're right that
move the business
bad
forward.
News travel very slowly and good news travel fast. So I think there's always a game of how can you reduce the lead time of bad news so that it becomes more equal, especially when you go into senior management. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, ensuring that you get a realistic image of how things are going on in the business, so you can act on it and not be disconnected from the front line. And that's maybe another principle I also took out of this lean journey, was the principle of in always thinking of the organizational triangle as inverted. So really valuing the fact that it's the front line throughout the value chain, the researchers in development, the operators on the production line, the reps out in the field in the commercial organization. Those are the ones driving the business. And how can we as leaders remove roadblocks from them, create the context for them to maximize what they're doing in support of them, rather than creating problems for them by having a very hierarchical organization where they need to go through multiple decision processes that are not very value adding and dragging out, making life complex for them. And I think that's also a principle that I'm trying to strive for, which is always very difficult to achieve.
I think a lot of companies struggle with that right now. In the pharma industry, there is a trend of moving towards more leaner, agile structures, so to speak, which usually means cutting out a middle management layer. It's a tech model designed for tech products that can be beta tested, but of course it's a fine balancing act in pharma because it's highly regulated and you can't beta test anything. in pharmaceuticals for obvious reasons. So it's certainly a fine balancing act. I want to pivot over to Novo, actually, and Novo Nordisk, because a lot of people watching now are very curious about Novo Nordisk. And it's been through, or going through, I should say, a big change. You've got one of the only, and I hate to use the word, but blockbusters in your portfolio at the moment. But I think people will be very interested to know the origin story, actually, of Novo Nordisk. Can you share a little bit about the origins and the founding values of Novo Nordisk?
Of course, yeah. We celebrated 100 years anniversary last year, so we have the history very present in our minds. We did, of course, a lot of talking about our roots during that year, but we do that in general also because we're a company founded on two physicians actually in Denmark in the early 1920s. That was around the time when insulin was discovered in Toronto in Canada. It was found out through tests on dogs that insulin could be used to treat diabetes, which at the time was a disease that you would die of once you were diagnosed. And so this couple in Denmark, you have August Krogh, the man who was a recently awarded Nobel Prize winner in animal physiology, and his wife, Marie Krogh, who was one of the first female physicians to be educated in Denmark. She was diagnosed with diabetes, actually, and she put herself under a very strict diet to survive as long as possible. And she heard about the discovery of insulin in Toronto, and because of the Nobel Prize, August Krogh was invited on a lecture tour in the US, and she convinced him to go on a side trip to Toronto to bring back the ability to manufacture and sell insulin for the treatment of diabetes in Europe. And so he did, and he managed to get this patent back for almost no money, but with the promise to give back to society what would come out of this operation. So Novo Nordisk started in 1923. It was then split into two companies because of competition between some leading employees. Already the year after, in 1924, a foundation was created to live up to the promise made for the patent of insulin. So what is now the Novo Nordisk Foundation was created. This is a non-profit foundation which is today having more than $100 billion under management, and where they every year pay out. Last year it was more than $1 billion for charity, humanitarian purposes, and research into human and planetary health. So that was the start of the journey. It was two companies competing fiercely until 1989 out of the same small country. And then finally in 89, they discovered that it probably would be better to collaborate than to compete in light of the growing international competition. So the company was merged back into Novo Nordisk, and that has been the structure since.
That's a very interesting origin story, and I understand that if I can turn my laser pointer on for a second, that this guy here was instrumental in forging. Again, this is a talk about leadership principles, not just on a personal level, but organization level. I understand this guy here was quite instrumental in forging the values of Novo Nordisk.
That's true. So we have a set of values anchored in what we call the Novo Nordisk Way today, and which is centered around a triple bottom line approach to doing business. And the guy was Danish, so he also had a difficult name. It's pronounced Mads Øvlesen. And he was CEO at a time where the company was developing also fast at that point in time, and they had a lot of leadership principles coming from the past around really investing in employees. It was a very progressive company up through the 20th century in terms of believing in the fact that if you pay attention to employee engagement, etc., you would create strong business results after it. So it was very early to invest in, share programs, company parties, bringing your family along, all these type of things. And at the same time, and of course, there was the very strong social purpose coming out from the foundation. And then at the same time, the manufacturing of insulin was continuously increasing, but the capacity of pig's pancreas was not able to meet demand if growth would continue. Fortunately, in the 80s, you also had the biotech revolution, where suddenly in research you found a way to use genetically modified yeast to produce massive amounts of insulin, and we adopted that. But we faced a lot of scrutiny and criticism from activist organizations like the Greenpeace. And that forced also the company to take a stance on, okay, how do we think ourselves as a player in the environment? And Mads Øvlesen, in addition to initiating a process whereby we described the Novo Nordisk way, was then also a person who put in place the concept of the triple bottom line. And we were one of the first companies to actually also put our ambitions into our annual reports and report progress towards those targets.
It's a very, very interesting story to get all three elements in. You've got the social piece, the sustainability piece, and the environmental sustainability piece, and the financial piece as well. I don't know many companies that in their founding values, or at least since 1986, have all three in. Most have the financial one in. I know that sustainability is really important for Novo Nordisk. Some of the people that are joining today are sustainability experts. Tell us a little bit more about how Novo Nordisk sees sustainability, some of the initiatives that Novo is doing at the moment.
Yeah, so I think, and especially as we are a growing company, I think it's very clear to us that no government or nation state will be able to solve some of the sustainability challenges that we are facing, both socially and environmentally, but also financially, long-term alone. No corporation can do it neither. So there's an ecosystem in each country where companies also need to be societal citizens contributing to creating sustainable societies, and in our case, sustainable healthcare systems. So this is something that is not just in the charter of our foundation, but something which we are really taking seriously at the company level and integrating in our strategies. So we have a sustainability strategy where we really want to be a partner to society to drive a sustainable healthcare system, which can then support sustainable societies. And we have a very big concern based on our focus area as to whether healthcare systems will be sustainable longer term if we are just continuing the current model. And now I'm sitting in Japan, and Japan is really a leading country in many ways, not least in terms of being a super aging society, with also here a rise in prevalence of chronic disease, not just as a function of being a super aging society, but also a country with very low fertility rate, which is also leading. The rest of the world is following, and that puts immense pressure, of course, from a macroeconomic perspective on society. And in the healthcare system, it puts pressure in many ways. From a macroeconomic perspective, budgets are under pressure, especially in these geopolitically uncertain times, which means that it's limited how much Ministry of Finance can channel into the healthcare system. But at the same time, because of the demographic challenge, you have fewer and fewer people being able to support in the healthcare system. And with the rising chronic disease, if we are not preventing it very effectively and also treating it effectively, we will see a massive rise in late complications from chronic disease over the coming decades, which is very costly. It takes quality of life down, but it's also unsustainable from an economic perspective. So our sustainability strategy on the social side is really about how can we support preventing, based on our disease awareness, chronic disease from rising at the speed it is doing currently, and help create a model also financially which is sustainable for healthcare systems, in order to be able to invest early enough to get the return of the investment in the format of more healthy populations who can contribute then also more productively to the economy. So that's on the social part. And then on the environmental part, I mean, the philosophy is, and I admit we are thinking very long term sometimes, but over time, human health and planetary health merge, and we see already now how climate change, etc., is affecting human health. So we are very keen on ensuring that we are, a fast runner in terms of finding solutions to not just climate change, but also biodiversity issues, etc. And that's really reflected in our sustainability strategy.
It certainly seems that Novo is very committed, as you said. In Japan, we being such a resource poor country, we do have a fair amount of recycling and some attention to energy in particular. But it's good to see that Novo is really taking it seriously, because I understand, if I'm not wrong, that all of Novo's factories run on green energy. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we've had, based on this triple bottom line target setting in our annual reports, and progress tracking against them, since the 2000s, we started setting very ambitious targets for our manufacturing, which of course was the biggest driver of CO2. We committed to an absolute reduction with the WWF, to reduce an absolute from our 1990 kind of baseline towards 2009, and we succeeded before 2010 to have all our Danish manufacturing sites powered by renewable energy, and then we set a target towards 2020 for all our international manufacturing sites to also become powered fully by fully renewable energy, and that we also succeeded. So you're right, that has been covered, and now, of course, similar to many other companies, we are setting targets towards 2030. Where we have a part of scope 1, 2, 3 that we want to have fully green, and then we have committed to a net zero target among other companies towards 2045. So we are on that journey, and I think, as you say, the milestones that we have achieved give us great hopes that we will eventually get there for the net zero target, even if today we have no clue exactly how to go there, but we need to set that breakthrough target, back to the value about being ambitious, in order to unleash the creativity of what needs to come in place in order to get there. So we are running many pilots in many aspects, not just around CO2. For instance, in Japan, we are running a pilot of recycling plastics from our injection pens, where we hope to find the systems and also influence and drive change for regulation in order for companies to have an easier time driving sustainable solutions, so that we can become circular and contribute to a circular economy over time.
One thing that I hear from other people in the industry about sustainability, and surveys get done on these kind of things, is that people don't know what it is, and secondly, how it impacts their work, or how their work impacts it. You, as the president of Novo Nordisk Japan, obviously you oversee a very large organization. How do you, as the leader, as an executive leader, how do you get people to understand what it is, take it seriously, to actually care about it?
Yeah, I think the obstacle usually is in our leadership discussions, where I think there are valid concerns often around, is this really a core capability of ours, and would we defocus too much from our, for instance, commercial priorities here if we are starting to broaden our focus a lot? And I value this type of concern, and we need to ensure that it does not defocus also from some of our shorter term priorities. But what I find and have found in all the places that I have been working on across the value chain and across geographies is that the theme of sustainability resonates so well with employees. It is a real source of engagement when you start to talk to it and invite for employees to be part of a journey where we drive a sustainability agenda. And if anything, it creates a bigger commitment to the purpose that we are having as a company, and hence focus on also what are our commercial targets. So I think it's the key element for us in terms of how to work with it has been to find ways in our leadership discussions to drive it in a way where we put enough resources behind it to move the needle, but without defocusing from some of our other priorities.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, one thing, that I've heard is, a good way to pitch sustainability is that as a healthcare company, as a pharmaceutical company, you can only really impact patients and, of course, their loved ones and family.
Yeah.
But by paying attention to the sustainability piece, you can give back to everybody, even if they're never going to be a patient. And I think that's quite a powerful message, which I think you mentioned to me previously, which is, I think, a good way to frame it. I want to just quickly bring up something that really intrigued me about Novo, and that is a founding value that's actually on your website as one of the vision, mission, value statements, that we as a company don't want to profit from chronic disease. Tell us a little bit about that. That's a very rare thing for a company to say, but very inspiring.
Yeah, so I think back to the origins of our company and the creation of the foundation. I think there are a lot of in these times, we're being challenged, and I mean, if you follow the media, you can see that our company specifically is being challenged by people like Bernie Sanders in the US, with the perception that pharmaceutical companies are greedy, and they're just in there to maximize the price in order to make huge profits, and that we are really a money machine. And of course, when you talk to employees in our company and other pharmaceutical companies, you find that everybody works here in order to help patients, and our principles are always centered around what is the right thing for the patients. And how the model works just creates these type of pricing structures which are necessary in order to maintain an innovation ecosystem and make it attractive to develop new treatments for the benefit of helping patients with unmet medical needs in the future. So I think in our company we have had the privilege of being a foundation owned. So this foundation that I talked about before, the Novo Nordisk Foundation, although in absolute terms it doesn't have share majority, because the shares that the foundation owns there's A shares, and then retail investors and institutional investors can invest in B shares. A shares have 10 votes as opposed to B shares that have 1 vote. You have a majority ownership in terms of votes in the foundation, which means that we cannot be acquired. And that has, of course, allowed us to be more long-term and think about, the reason why we are here in the world. It's really to defeat serious chronic disease, and that's at the center of our mission statement. So that's why we are investing in prevention, even if a lot of people are challenging us on, what is the business case really for that. But what we have found over time is that it ends up being a great business opportunity also, if you always have at the core of your mission that you want to defeat serious chronic disease, even if that in theory takes away your foundation for business. But financial results should come as a consequence of doing good, and as part of the triple bottom line, because it's necessary in order to be able to continue to do good for society. So it's a secondary, it's an outcome from the key purpose. It's not an end in itself. I think it's in that way you should understand it. And when we drive for prevention, we will also be the first ones to discover how to really solve some of these key societal challenges that will open up new business opportunities for doing good, which will also make us financially sustainable over time. That's the principle by which we've also gone into obesity recently, because you could say obesity is a prevention for diabetes. The huge rise in obesity over the past decades has come from a rise in type 2 diabetes, driven very much by an obesity pandemic in the world. But as we have researched in obesity over the past 30 years, and it has been a negative business case, but we did it because it would prevent this rise of diabetes potentially. It ended up also turning out to be a very favorable business opportunity, and so we believe it will continue if we go upstream in terms of the prevention agenda.
That's very, very interesting. I think I've got some facts and figures about Novo on screen now, and I think a lot of people will be very surprised at the motivation for the obesity drug to actually prevent diabetes, because it comes with the term blockbuster attached to it, which I know is not a term that you use, but in the media it's used in that regard as, it's like, let's make a load of money. But actually, the Novo opinion is about it preventing diabetes, so you wouldn't need lifelong insulin, because of course that's very, very difficult to, well, impossible to cure at the moment. I know that Novo is doing a lot of work on education as well, if I'm not wrong. You've got something in Chiba Prefecture at the moment about teaching children how not to become metabolically unhealthy.
Yeah, so for a number of years, we have here in Japan, on the social responsibility that I mentioned, been running in collaboration with academic institutions, research, municipalities, efforts to prevent diabetes from arising, really trying to understand what are the systemic factors that lead to this rise in diabetes and how can we prevent it. So both in the Fukushima prefecture around Koriyama city and in Asahi city in Chiba, we've been running what we call cities changing diabetes. And now as we are broadening our focus, trying to move upstream also into obesity, we are expanding the scope into something we call Cities for Better Health, and where we are very curious about the opportunity in Chiba or in other places to really partner with universities, biotech startups, other vendors, digital vendors, schools, etc., around how do we create a society that doesn't accelerate the obesity pandemic, which is also happening here in Japan. To the surprise of many, in Japan, there are 16 million people living with what the Japanese Association for the Studies in Obesity, JASO, defines as obesity disease, because of a genetic predisposition in Asian populations to accumulate fat around the visceral organs, which create the health problems. Then a very large part of the population is in danger of developing these health conditions over time, all the comorbidities related to obesity. So we really want to try to engage with other stakeholders in society who can influence the systemic problems in society, which starts all the way from childhood. And so we are, as part of our efforts, focusing on childhood obesity prevention to make sure that people are not getting obesity early on in life, because then they drag it on, and that really increases the risk then later on in life.
And unfortunately, I think I have that same genetic predisposition. I have to say, it's very inspiring that that Novo sees healthcare as a physician would, as in prevention first and then treatment, obviously, if needed. It's particularly inspiring. I have to quickly tell the people that are watching now that despite all of working with these three values, giving back to society, preventing before curing, Novo Nordisk has the healthiest financials of any company I've ever seen. It's ROCE, return on capital employed, which is how well it turns capital available to it from shareholders, from income and so on, into more money. It's 80%. There's no other company in the world that has ROCE of 80%. I think Apple's is about 50. Apple's a very, very healthy company. So despite not being ruthlessly financially motivated, it's actually the most successful financially of all the companies in the pharmaceutical industry that I've ever seen. So big congratulations on that. We've got some questions.
Yeah.
I'll quickly ask people who are watching now, throw in your questions. This is a quick Q&A now with Kasper, and ask me anything, doesn't matter what it is. And in that spirit, from Abdonna here, thank you for sharing your journey in Novo Nordisk, Kasper. Do you have any hobbies that helps you to be a better leader? That's a great question.
Yeah. So I think I have, as you could see maybe on the very first picture that I also included in my profile of my family, I have 3 children. They keep me pretty occupied. I think so I have a hobby around, raising my family and my children, and I think there's great leadership learning in raising children, because you soon realize with children that you cannot direct them to anything. So everything needs to be coached. I'm a very impatient person by nature, so my biggest leadership challenge is to become more patient, not giving the answer all the time, but allowing people a bit of time in frustration to figure out the solutions by themselves, and that has been one hobby that has improved my leadership skills, although I'm far from there. Then I think I'm also every morning in the gym before I go to work. I need some time where I don't need to think about a lot of other things. And I think respecting the quiet time, the reflection time that you need to not just run a rat race has been another realization, because I have been working hard previously in my career still. I do, but with a tendency to just fill out the calendar every day, and then I run from one meeting to the other, and I just keep the world running in the same way it did yesterday. So that hobby is really maintaining my focus on having focus time, thinking time, and I have with my assistant an agreement that she's putting in blocked times also in my calendar, so it's not filled with meetings all the time in order to be able to reflect. And I find that every time I succeed with it, I have much better reflections about how to drive change or change the way in which we run our processes as opposed to just continue running them. I think that's true. Then I love music, and I have a hobby I have a very broad taste, and I think that inspires a lot of curiosity and open-mindedness that I also try to bring into work. I have not managed to get my leadership team to dance to music yet, but we have been singing a lot of karaoke, and I feel that is really supporting our leadership development together as a team.
Fantastic. A quick question from me, actually. Any books that you would recommend just for life or leadership, either way? Any books that have been really inspiring for you?
Yeah, so I have I'm reading a lot of different books, and of course a lot of them are about leadership theory, although those are typically the more boring ones. But I have been I read a book recently called Winning from Within as part of a program I attended, which I found quite inspiring in terms of realizing that often when you are trying to succeed with a strategy or a specific effort, you are analyzing very much the external stakeholder landscape and making strategies for how can you secure buy-in to the strategy and fellowship. But actually, a lot of the negotiation that takes place are among the internal stakeholders, and you need to get to know who are the different voices. If you take you study personality profiles, there are people who are warriors who are very focused on drive and execution. There are people who are more thinkers, who are critically assessing risks, analyzing to get to the right answer. You have people who are who are dreamers, who see opportunities. You have people who are more relation based and who are good at creating connections. And you need all four, but all four are often in conflict about how you go about a strategy, the implementation of it, etc. And you have a bias based on your upbringing and based on what you have experienced in your leadership, different roles. So becoming very aware of, what are my biases and how can I, become a holistic leader who takes into account in an unbiased way the different voices, so I don't have a tendency to always be the warrior that goes to execution and do not pay enough attention to people and relations, for instance.
Yeah, it's good to recognize that you've got different modes, and so, as you say, the internal stakeholders are really important. I know as a coach, I help leaders to try to observe the emotions that they're feeling. Like, where do they feel it? What is the emotion? That's the one that's driving the car, obviously. I think one of the most important traits for a leader is stress management. I mean, if you chose one skill, it would be stress management and emotional regulation. And it sounds like you, as a psychologist, have got that down. We've got a few more questions to get through. I'd just like to read some of these questions. Some of these are very good. I was intrigued by your comment earlier on about getting teams to dream big.
Mm-hmm.
Here, that's not possible, and then work through a strategy to turn that into something, to turn it into reality somehow. What have you learned in your time in Japan about how to do that successfully here in Japan?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question, and I don't know if I have been successful about it, but actually going back to my experience from Toyota lean journey that I was on during my time in manufacturing, I think is actually coming from some of the philosophies in Japan, which are typically also longer term in their perspectives, to really have this policy deployment approach where you look at what is really the North Star that you should strive for, and how do you then set targets that are breakthrough targets in the medium term, and then how do you cascade that down into the annual wheel of targets. So in the past, I have been very inspired by this approach. It needs to be combined, and that's also my experience here in Japan, with a change in how people are rewarded, because we have a tendency, especially in cultures that are high risk aversion, to not wanting to set targets that we are in doubt whether we can achieve. At the same time, I've experienced the culture here in Japan as being a very high achiever. I mean, everybody wants to really drive and succeed with targets. And I am experiencing that when you start to then take away, change the incentive system so you're not being penalized for being in red and on a commercial target, a finance target, etc., and rewarded when being in green only, but rather you are being rewarded for how ambitious you are, how fast you can get onto a trajectory which is moving the business forward, how good you are at taking learning, so that we are adjusting our tactics along the way in order to really get towards that North Star. It releases a lot of energy. I've experienced it, I've succeeded with it previously, and that has inspired me to continue this approach. In Japan, it's still a journey in the beginning.
I guess as you mentioned earlier on, it's about that psychological safety.
Yeah.
As you're saying, that it's not just about the bottom line; it's actually about the wider contribution.
Yeah.
And I guess that again links to the three values of Novo Nordisk about, not just financial but social and also environmental as well.
I need the same level of ambition, ability to dream, to think differently here as I've done in other places, and that's where I think people also start to thrive and develop when they feel that they're really part of something bigger and driving a change. So exactly as you say, it's about creating the safety that if we dream and if we start to put some of the things into the plans, how are you then rewarding that you created the right type of journey, even if you didn't get there at the arbitrary time where you set the deadline as in your plan. And of course, it's a very difficult leadership task, because of course you need to also have accountability in terms of targets, so you cannot wash it all out. But to me, where it has succeeded has been when you still had accountability in terms of breakdown on targets at the operational short-term level, but you separated and put other elements into the performance evaluation of the individual employees. So still a lot of breakdowns of KPIs, but a slightly different conversation in the performance review.
Which kind of leads us actually on to the next question as well, which is a little bit more Japan specific. So from Kohei Onozaki, what is your impression of Japan? What are the strengths and opportunities for improvement for business people here? And what are your observations about the Japan pharmaceutical industry, both positive and the challenges as well?
Yeah, also a great and a big question. I think I have been very positively surprised in the culture about the respect that people have for each other. The decency, I mentioned that as one of my core values, and in that sense, I feel very much at home. And the attentiveness to quality and to flawless execution. So, once a process is in place, everybody's performing it to perfection, and there's a lot of continuous improvement going in towards getting to perfection in that process. So I think that has a lot of strength. A lot of people are, when I came into the country, also gave me cultural training in the Nemawashi concept, and the frustration that people from the West could sometimes feel with the long decision processes, but I have also experienced the messiness of implementation and execution in more Western cultures when everybody was not in alignment about exactly what we decided. So I think it's actually both a strength and, of course, then also a weakness. In terms of the challenges, and this is also coming into the pharmaceutical industry, you have processes running the country, the system, etc. Even if, say, for instance, in the healthcare system, people know that it's not sustainable. We need reform. We need to change. Getting to the point where we agree, okay, let's get reform going. It's almost an impossible endeavor. So a lot of continuous improvement, but really taking the step out of the box. Everybody is able to think out of the box, but getting people to commit to drive real step change, I have found very difficult so far. In the pharmaceutical industry, I think there's a lot of focus from government to revitalizing the life science ecosystem in Japan. A lot of money is being poured into early biotech. There's great research going on. There's great potential, but there's not the entrepreneurship that you would find around Boston in the US and certain other places in the world that translated into real commercial opportunities. So there's something around the entrepreneurship culture that needs to be developed. And then I think we need to get the stakeholders aligned on the fact that life science is an ecosystem. The pharmaceutical environment is an ecosystem where you cannot solve any particular challenge by only looking at the early startup biotech segment of the ecosystem. Just like big pharma cannot solve it only by asking for more predictable prices, which is a problem in Japan. We need to have Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, of Business sitting together and create one ecosystem that works, where you have a predictable, attractive market, which will make multinationals also invest in early biotechs and invest in the whole translation into commercial opportunities. That is a bit lacking today, and the US and China is running fast ahead compared to Japan. I think the Japanese government is realizing it and want to tackle not just the biotech issue, but also the drug lack, drug loss problem in the country, etc. So I'm optimistic that the right thinking is there. I'm looking for the stakeholders to partner with to drive real change.
And change can happen very quickly, and I think Japan has certainly proved that historically that can happen. Kasper, thank you so much for your time. We're coming up to the hour now. There's a couple of minutes left. Is there a final message that you'd like to share with the people who have joined today?
I think leadership is a brilliant topic. So thank you for inviting me to this talk. I always enjoy sparring around it, and I think leadership is a discipline in itself that is really not lacking. But if we fertilize it further, I think we can drive change also for Japan. At a societal level, helping to continue the very strong track record that the country has in terms of excelling within existing disciplines, but also taking the steps to drive change for society at a more step change type level. And I look forward to being a part of that journey together with the rest of great leaders in the country and other stakeholders. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Kasper, and thank you for everyone who's joined this wonderful talk today. I've learned a lot from Kasper and also about Novo Nordisk. Very inspiring. Thank you again, Kasper, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Russell. Have a nice afternoon. Bye-bye.